Welcome to Mind Your Wedding Business podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Dennis. In addition to leading the charge at Wedding IQ, I also run Fantasy Sound Event Services, a lighting and entertainment company based in Livermore, California, that I founded over 35 years ago. Each week on this podcast, you'll hear thought-provoking and empowering interviews with wedding professionals who have found success in the industry. If you're a business-minded wedding pro who loves love, but also cares about their bottom line, buckle up and get ready to learn from a new industry expert each week. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of Mind Your Wedding Business. We're going to be welcoming Artem Lomaz. Artem is an international wedding and event master of ceremonies. Artem Lomaz has built his brand as the go-to MC for luxury weddings and events. Whether accompanying a DJ or a band, the award-winning MC has refined his role and is known to industry insiders as a meticulous performer. Combining the hospitality and etiquette, Artem helps bring weddings and event storyboards to life. As a speaker, he brings his expertise in luxury services and his personal branding to stages worldwide. So we're going to be welcoming Artem Lomaz into our podcast. All right, welcome to another episode of Mind Your Wedding Business. We have the one and only Artem Lomaz with us. He's going to be talking about personal branding, identifying how to set up your brand and position it accordingly, and how branding plays into advertising and promotion. So welcome to the show, Artem.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited because branding, I think, is on the personal side, is I think people kind of forget, that's an important part of, getting recognized. And, I have been known for wedding socks and for the Southwest first class seat. So I get people all the time. I'll be at weddings and people will literally pull up my pant legs to see my socks, which is kind of awkward. And then I get people all the time either sending me photos, tagging me in Instagram, if they're in that Southwest seat. So, let's dive in and start talking about personal branding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's weird that people are pulling up your pant leg, but I think at the same time, at the same time, I guess if you're that guy, I don't know why they feel the authority to do it, but they want to see the socks, which I guess in some ways a testament to your personal brand. That's fantastic. But yes, what you had mentioned is a lot of people sometimes, it's not that necessarily they neglect it, is that you're always focused on the business element and you're always thinking, we always try to think a few steps ahead. And when you're doing that, you're thinking about marketing. And that makes sense, but the problem is branding is the foundation. And you can't really properly market unless you have a specifically defined brand.
100%.
So you can start to market, it just won't be defined because your brand isn't defined. But that's sort of the bad news part of it. The good news is everyone has a personal brand. It's just possibly not defined by you quite yet, or maybe it's not defined from a business perspective. But one of the first things I always suggest people do, and this is sort of a silly exercise, and I learned this a few years ago back with going through kind of my marketing, just going through my background is in advertising as well. So I kind of just have been keeping up with what people have suggested to do. And this has been in a couple of books also. It's a silly exercise, but it does help because you start to realize what people see from their outside perspective versus what you feel like your personal brand is. So the exercise is to get a couple people together and just ask them, what are your top 3 traits when you're asking about yourself, right? So you want to see the outsider perspective. And with that group, you want it to be a little bit of a mix. So let's say like 3 maybe family members. I think sometimes family is a little too close, right? So they know you personally, which is good, but get a few family members and then get a few maybe past clients and then get a few people who are just acquaintances in the networking world and then 3 close friends. Then once you have that mix of 10 to 12 people, which words are coming up most frequently? And then make a list yourself and compare that to their list and see what aligns. And if it aligns, great. That means you guys have hit on something that does make sense. And if it doesn't align, does that mean you need to either redefine yourself or redefine your brand? I think it's always easier to redefine a brand than yourself because you don't want to live a brand that doesn't reflect who you are. I mean, you can, but probably not the most fun thing to do. But I feel like if you have a brand that is authentic and reflective of who you are. And then from there, that can carry into your business brand and how you carry yourself. For the most part, small business owners, even if you're not the face of the brand, like if you're selling things online and no one even knows who you are, maybe your personal brand doesn't matter. But in reality, if you're going to networking events, you're the face. So it's a case of, yes, maybe you're promoting your website and you're nowhere to be found on that website. But in our industry, even if you're sending people out, you're still the person who is behind the banner name. So I think the key is honing in on your true personal brand, how that works, and then using that to put the pieces in place for marketing and promotion. So the personal brand is the baseline.
Okay, so let's grow from that, or maybe back up real quick. So it was kind of, you touched on something there that you said if you're out networking, you are the brand, and it kind of, I can't tell you how many times, and it's probably bad on my part, that I thought someone was the business owner of a certain business because that's who I met and that's who I associated with that business so many different times, and come to find out they were a manager, a salesperson, or something along that line with that business because they did a really good job in, of making themselves known as the brand of that business. So
Totally.
yeah, it was really interesting.
But
So
that's also a testament to them because they've now taken on what that brand means. That's a testament to whomever the true owner is being able to define and parlay that information to that person who's now a representative of their brand, and then for that person to properly represent that brand. So when you are out and about and your team is out and about, you want it to be aligned with what your values of your brand are to take that
yeah,
position.
yeah.
So that's, yes, very well put. It's very important that not one person is living the brand if there's more than one person in the company.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of business owners, where they probably fail when it comes to, getting their brand out there is that they don't really bring it down from top to bottom. They might focus on just the top, maybe not the bottom. So, what
Right.
what are some things that people can do to really get the brand, for everyone out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because it's about values. So once you've, and it's kind of like a cliche at this point to say find your why, right? But when you start to
No.
redefine why you're in the industry, why you're doing what you're doing, and then why you need to bring people on board, it needs to be reflective of the true core values of your why.
Mm,
So when you do that, you go, okay, I started in the wedding industry because X, Y, and Z. And whoever I bring on board, whoever I'm working with, needs to understand that and then also reflect it. So to answer your question, it's really a matter of being authentic to why the brand exists in the first place.
yeah, well, and that's a good point because I think that's where a lot of people, they are imposters, I guess would be maybe be a way to do it, is that they're not really their true selves when they're out
Right.
there, or even when it comes to, or they'll put on a face when it comes to meeting with clients, and then they're someone totally different behind the scenes. So
That's very well put because I think it's not necessarily that they're intentional imposters. I think a lot of times we craft what we think the client or the prospect wants to see, and that's where you start to move further away from your why, right? So sometimes you ask people, why are you in whatever industry, and they go, well, the money. Like, yeah, but you can
yeah,
make money in so many different ways. You can decide to do any other industry, but there's a specific reason you chose, and in our industry it's a very specific industry.
yeah,
So there's a reason you chose to be here. Hone in on that reason, but when you start to then sort of posture or position where it's not reflective of your true self, then you start to get into trouble because not only now are you not really living up to your brand, you're also putting something out there that's possibly going to disappoint the client once they realize that's not really who you are. And then also what it does is it misaligns the relationship. And
yeah,
then you're potentially negating future references from that.
yeah.
Right? That kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're going to do something that's disingenuous, not a lot of good's going to come from that.
No, never ever. And that's where I think a lot of people, well, even like own your mistakes. That's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people make a mistake and then, the relationships, you falling back on your values, all that kind of stuff. If you own up to it, people are going to respect you a whole lot more than when you try to cover it up and all that kind of stuff too. So
Totally. And I think a lot of red flags aren't red flags in the moment. Retroactively, you're like, oh, that was a red flag. But
yeah,
you learn as you go. And to your point, you own that and you move on and you realize that that's something you take with you as you evolve in your brand. And that's another part of it where brands evolve just as human beings, and especially if your personal brand reflects who you are. So if your brand is the same that it was 20 years ago when you first started it, I don't know, chances are you're not the same person, so maybe it's time for a brand refresh or a reposition or something. Or maybe it's time to grow as a person if you're the same person that you were 20 years ago. So yes, there's a lot of evolution that has to consistently take place as well.
so and that's so. How often should someone look at a brand refresh? Like I've been in business for 30 something years. Like how often should I be looking at that?
My answer would have been different 10 years ago, but I think
Okay.
now with just how quickly everything is changing technologically and just how things are in terms of expectancy, and you and I have chatted about this personally, what is considered luxury now is going to be standard in 5 years, if not
Oh
less,
yeah. Oh
right?
yeah.
So now luxury is like, would have been blowing people out of the water. What standard is now was luxury 10 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So I think if I were to say it now, as of today's date of recording, I would say every 5 years, maybe 3 to 5 years, and it doesn't mean you need to do a whole rehaul of your brand. Perhaps just a repositioning or something where people know X, Y, and Z about you, and then add another like, oh, X, Y, and Z, but also A, B, and C, right? Maybe there's just another layer, and you focus more on that layer instead of the older one. One of the biggest things, the examples that I use is I do destination events, and I have a lot of friends that do destination events. As you get older, you may not want to do them as much, right? I
Sure.
have friends that have done it for 20 years, and now children have come into play. They don't want to be on the road every weekend, right? So that's a case of when you have a big life change, that could change your brand. And that's great because that means your life is changing and it's okay to adjust your brand accordingly. If someone calls you and you did their event 20 years ago, you can go ahead. I no longer do that, that, and that. I do this now. And I don't think anyone's going to get offended because I don't think they're doing what they were doing 20 years ago either.
I know. No. Looking back
So,
20 years, I'm not doing what I was doing back then either.
right,
So,
right. For better or for worse. Yes.
actually, I would say for better. So,
That's good.
yeah, no, I started out as a DJ, as you know, and I was doing a lot of school events, and I have not done a school event in about 12 to 13 years. And I have not looked back. So,
Yeah. No regrets, though, I'm sure.
zero regrets when it comes to having Skittles thrown at you and all that kind of fun things that has comes with you're a crappy DJ because you're not playing the dirty rap song and all that kind of stuff. So
That hasn't changed, I'm assuming.
no, no,
But go
I
ahead.
would say it's probably even worse now. So
Well, that's the thing. I wanted to bring up the point of because things evolve now, it's going to be they're throwing Skittles at you while they're also filming you to see if you freak out and they can go viral on TikTok, right? Who knows?
exactly. Well, no, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the world we live in right now. So
And that's also part of the evolution. Your brand has to evolve with what's happening. I'm not a big social media person just because personally I'm not, but I understand it's a necessary evil. And that's one of those things where, not necessarily evil, but it's a necessity, right? It's something where
yeah,
we have to get acclimated to certain things. Even the big talk now, as of recording, is AI, and that's something where you could look at it as a threat, you could look at it as an opportunity. So there's always something evolving that we can build a brand around.
yeah, yeah, very true, very true. So as we move towards building the brand, like where should one look? I don't know. Should they look outside at other brands to get ideas, or where should they go?
Simply put, inward, right? Look
Okay.
inward to see, because we're talking about personal brand, I think you want to make sure it's reflective of who you are. To
Okay.
your question, though, I think it's absolutely always a good idea to look outside for ideas, just to see if you can see like who's honed in on a really good brand opportunity, especially from a personal perspective. And I think it's a wonderful idea to get mentorship. That's
Hmm.
essentially when I started, I looked at a few people where I said, I like what they're doing, let me see if I can have a conversation. And that really turns into reach out and see who's willing to have a conversation with you and who isn't. I think for the most part, most people will talk to you. The beauty of it is they can give you all the blueprints and all the secrets to their trade, but you can't replicate it because you're not them. But you have to create something that's you. That's again a reason to look inward. So when it comes to the time where you're then the authority getting questions, then you could do the same thing and pass on that knowledge and wisdom and say, this is the blueprint, but you're going to have to kind of put your own mark on it.
Yeah.
So it's really more about looking inward while also gaining mentorship and just gaining some exposure to other brands where it makes sense for us to take a look at people in the wedding industry. It makes sense for us to take a look at maybe entertainers or just different service providers. It doesn't make sense for us to look at, manufacturers of purses. Like, yeah, there is an aesthetic to certain things in terms of branding, but we are service providers or we don't sell goods. So it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense for us to look in that direction. So understanding where you are and what correlates to what you are providing from there, then you can get those ideas that make sense. Because there's certainly things that work, but don't align with your brand or your industry.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's a good way of thinking about it too. Is like you got to look inside. Yeah. Well, and because I feel a lot of people, the wedding industry is a very copycat. You know, what we do.
Sure.
Here's a photo on Pinterest. I want that. I saw this on TikTok. I want to do that at my wedding. So how, what are some tips that you think people do to keep themselves authentic or keep themselves, fresh? Like are you looking at it constantly and putting your own spin on it, or like how do you handle that? I guess.
Yeah, what's the phrase? Comparison is the theft of joy. So try
Yeah.
not to I
Yeah.
try not to be too comparative, but there's also things that you and I can get inspiration from a photographer. That even though we're not photographers, we can get inspiration from something. So I think it's a matter of keeping a perspective that inspiration is okay as long as it doesn't become like something that you're jealous of or that you're competing against. But I think the key is really to your, I guess, to your concern about the Pinterest aspiration, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of a thing where that's just going to happen. Just knowing that that's something we step our foot into, and knowing that if we are talking to a prospect or a client, just get the best way to get the realization in house, right? To say, look, this is what you want, but you want it because you saw it. But don't you want something more unique? So I think it depends on who you're talking to. If you have someone that's like, "Hey, my cousin did all of this, and I want to recreate my cousin's wedding," all right, maybe Kevin's not the right person for you to do that,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
can get somebody to help you do that. But you could always then it becomes sort of like salesmanship, right? You can always get into that conversation to say, "Okay, this is what you've seen, and that's great, and that's a good stepping stone," right? I guess the foundation is what I would use. I would say, great, I like that you like certain things or that you like where you're coming with a plan, right? You know, that like instead of a Pinterest board, they got the trapper
Yeah.
keeper of all the wedding magazines. So
It's a word I have not heard in a long time.
I try to throw in a few of those. That's part of my personal brand. I try to do some throwbacks.
Trapper keeper. Okay.
Yes. So they have their trapper keeper of ideas, and let's say, well, we'll go to the digital world and let's say they have their Pinterest board, and you go, that's a great foundation. Now, based on that, let's see how we can elevate the event. Because now what's happening is they expect a certain baseline. And that's good for us to know, but we don't want to hit the baseline. We want to exceed expectation, not only theirs, but their guests. So I think that's a way to sort of look at that as, okay, this is what they want at the bare minimum. Most of us, especially people who are viewers right now, know that especially if you're going through the process of like wanting to escalate and elevate your brand and your business, we're not going for bare minimum, right? We're not going for
No.
basic expectation. So I would say anytime anybody comes to you with like, this is what we're thinking, this is what we want, cool, that's great. That's what they call in the advertising industry a creative brief. That means, okay, you have some clarity, doesn't have to be perfect, but here's some clarity of what you want and what you expect, and let's actually now put our project to it. Let's put our hands on it, and how can we spin it out to something that someone hasn't experienced before?
Interesting. So we've taken the time, developed, looked at the why, done all the stuff, and now we get out there, we start putting out, what we feel is who we are. What if it's not working? What any suggestions there?
Yeah, it never hurts to rebrand or reposition or retool. I think
Okay.
if it's not working, then something is amiss, right? And it's a
Okay.
matter of I wish there was a wizard or a magic wand that you could call or wave and say, just tell me what I'm doing wrong, and they tell you, right? And that's something that not a lot of people want to hear, like what they're doing wrong. I would love to hear what I'm doing wrong if something's not working, because if that's just that one tweak, unfortunately, it's not that. It's pieces to a puzzle that we don't even know what the result should look like. We don't even have that little box that tells us what the picture should look like at the end.
Yeah.
So I think that if something's not working, there's always ways to look at it and go, well, what's the piece that isn't? So you lay out the plan and you say, okay, from a marketing perspective, I've done this, this, and this, and it seems to be okay. Here's whether it's the funnel or here's where things are breaking down. And if it's at the point where things are breaking down at your brand, it just means it's not defined maybe clearly enough. So maybe the problem isn't
Mm.
your brand, it's just how you define the brand or how you're positioning it.
Or they didn't
So
take the time to go through the whole process. Could that be it?
yeah,
They just yeah.
absolutely. That'll do it, right? If you didn't go through
Yeah.
the process, if you're cutting corners. But the joke I always use, and especially in networking, this is one of the things that I really wish I knew when I first started. Because when you start, you're getting business advice from anywhere and everywhere. And that's not always great, right? So people tell you, make sure everybody knows about your business. Yeah, but also that's a lot of wasted effort because there's people that know about my business that I will never work with, and that's perfectly fine. And they're just not my target audience and they're not my market.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to target like young professionals and you're going to a networking event for retirees, it just doesn't align, right?
Yeah.
People who are
Yeah.
retired are not in line for your service that you have for young professionals.
No.
So that's a I guess like a little bit of a case study or an example of that's just the networking part of where what may not be working. What may not be working is how you're positioning your brand. So maybe you have it clearly defined, you know your why, you know your instinct of why you want to do this, why you're in this industry, but you're putting that position somewhere where it's not being either heard at all or maybe it's being heard by not the right people.
Mhm.
And so I think just figuring out how that plan, how that branding goes out to the mass public to get that to your audience, and then picking it apart, kind of working backwards, where's the breakdown? At some point, you'll find where it's not working.
Yeah, so it seems like at the end you got to keep your mind open and be open to good constructive criticism, and that's which I think a lot of us in this industry don't do a very good job of. There's people that do, but then no one wants to hear what they're not doing well, and no one wants to, you know, we're too proud. I feel maybe that's in our industry. So
I no, I mean, listen, I get it. There are certain things that I've heard where I'm like, okay, agree to disagree and just move on. It doesn't mean it's good
yeah,
advice either. But there are certain things where it's like, okay, do you want to have your pride or do you want to stay in business for another 10, 20 years?
yeah.
So I'll take, I'll take the hit to the pride if it means I'm still making money in 20 years.
Yeah, and that's what I think some of these businesses over the years just didn't, think about, like evolving, coming up with the times, That's something in our industry. Our clients averagely stay the same age, but we continue to get older, so how are we connecting with them? I have a friend of mine that, is, to the end of their career, and they're just not they would rather talk to everyone on the phone. And nowadays clients, that's the last place they want to meet you. The moms will meet you there, but the clients, they don't want to meet you there. So, it's like
Yeah.
getting to where they are,
Right.
evolving with the times, and that just, I think it all comes back to it. So,
Yeah. Oh, and that's also part of the brand too. If your brand isn't showing that you're willing to evolve and willing to keep an open mind, that could also, you look at what impressions mean, right? So if they get that impression that you're not willing to adjust with the times, then maybe you're not willing to adjust your process.
yeah,
Everybody always says in our industry, your wedding, your way, however you want it. Like, of course, that's, yeah, we're not gonna, who's gonna go and go, hey, you want a wedding, but it's my way as the service
yeah.
provider, right?
It's
Yeah, of
A,
course
B,
you
or
do.
C. You get
Right,
it. Yeah.
exactly.
Three
So
options.
they're going to look at that and go, if you're not willing to make adjustments based on what you're doing, then maybe you're not going to be willing to make adjustments with us as a client. And they may not tell you that, may not ever get to that point, but that's when you just get either no returns to your emails or you just go, we've gone with someone else.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a willingness, but just such as in life, right? It's sort of like there's no handbook for parenting, and when you're a parent, you got to adjust as those ages progress, and same thing with business. As your business progresses, you got to make those adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, and that's what I don't think I think unfortunately some people don't do, which is hopefully why they're here and listening and learning to move forward. So
Right.
anyway, all right, so time we talked about it, the why we've talked about. Anything we missed, Artem?
I think I just want to quickly touch upon. I know you had asked before when we were off camera about certain things that I would necessarily either do differently or just understanding how to position your brand. Going back to the networking part of things, knowing how to properly network, I think, is
Mm,
essential. Where you get into a room full of professionals, and you and I have been in many rooms together where we're amongst our peers, and it's a little different than being in a room with 300 people who do different things.
yeah,
So setting your expectation when you're doing that, and when you're possibly promoting your brand, it might be different when I I'm in an event with you and it's all our people, it's all wedding industry or event industry folks. We have certain terminology we use together. We have certain things that we address together that we wouldn't be doing in a room full of potential clients,
yeah.
right? We don't use the same terms. So I think even that, those little minor adjustments, and I think the other part of it is consistency.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned networking because I think a lot of people, there's the spray and pray people that walk around the room.
Mhm.
I was, WIPA's international president for a while there. And one of the complaints we would get from people is like, I joined, I got nothing. Well, okay, did you go to an event? Okay, well, then they go to an event. I attended one event and I got nothing. And so, and it's just like, and I think it's people don't have realistic expectations. It takes time to build, to
Yeah.
to develop all this kind of stuff. And it goes back to relationships. People are going to want to do business who they have a relationship with and who they connect with. And I guess that full circle goes right back to the brand, you
It
know?
does, but if you think about it, if you're walking into a room with 300 people, is it realistic to think you're going to become best friends with 300 people right out of the
No,
gate? Like,
no.
you might connect with two, but those
Yeah.
two might get you a great event in 10 years. And that's fine, but that's essentially what the buildup of the relationship is, to your point. One thing you really touched on that I think is a wonderful point too is the consistency. So not only attending the events and putting in the work for a relationship, like any relationship in life, you got to put in the work. But if you show up to an event and you want to be the nice suit guy and you show up in a nice suit once and then you go, why doesn't anybody know me as the nice suit guy? Well, you got to do it more than like 5 times for people to really take notice. And so when I do this seminar on stage, the example I give is if let's say you hop into my car and LL Cool J is on the radio. Probably not going to think much of it. You hop into my car a second time, LL Cool J's on again, probably may not connect the dots. You hop in a third time, it's like, okay, maybe there's something there, but maybe it's coincidental. Once you hop into my car a fourth time and you hear, I want a girl with extensions in her hair, bamboo earrings, you're going to go, okay, you're going to connect and go, this guy is an LL Cool J fan. So it takes some consistency and consistency across the board, tonality wise, with the brand. So if you have your new logo on your website, your old logo on your business cards, and your older logo on your Instagram, it's not consistent either. So it needs to be tonality and consistency and actual showing up, talk the talk, walk the walk consistency.
Yeah, and I think that's what people really miss. It's well, even to the point to take it a deeper, like get involved, join a committee, like get out there because that's how people are going to get to know you. And then the other thing I think people really miss the boat when it comes to that is that they're bad committee members, bad board members, and then they don't realize that reflects their brand as well, because then
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. Everything you do is a reflection of your personal brand. So even if you're not in business, honestly, like there's, when kids are graduating school and they're being taught how to put together a resume and show up to interviews, that's a personal brand.
yeah, yeah, it's everywhere. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Artem, when I jump in your car, you pick me up at the airport. What am I going to listen to on the radio? Now I'm curious.
Oh,
Is it
most
LL?
likely L Cool J.
Okay, all right. I was
I'm a proponent of I always say pre 2008 hip hop. That's what mostly you'll.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
How about you? If I jump in your car,
I'm all over. You might hear sports talk radio. I'll be honest with you. I'm a
fair
very
enough.
as you know, I'm a very diehard sports person.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when it comes to music, I'm all over the place. I like from Billy Joel to I like Sammy Hagar Van Halen. I don't know why. I've always been a Sammy guy.
No
I
problem.
actually, he tours a lot around here. I've seen him in the last couple of years and whatnot. So anyway,
Nice.
we can talk about music for a long time. So
We can, and we can talk about sports for a long time, which we have.
yes,
But I want to touch on sports a little bit too,
okay,
because sports teams, that's a brand,
yeah.
right? Imagine being a fan of something for 30 years, ups and downs, good and bad seasons. There's a lot of brand loyalty with sports.
Oh,
And that's
big
something I
time.
would look at if I'm developing a brand, because that loyalty, again, like you're a fan of a team that you were a fan of 30 years ago, the players are completely different. The
Oh
results
yeah.
are completely different, right? But you're still devoted to that team.
It was very interesting. I just watched the latest Ted Lasso. I'm a huge
Hmm.
Ted Lasso fan,
Hmm.
and one of the things they said, it was either this episode or the last episode, and it made me like, I'm still trying to figure out like how this whole thing's going to end and who's going to be the good guy and bad guy. But Ted said something to Coach Beard that, hey, they were sitting in the pub, they were talking, the fans were upset about something they did, and he goes, hey, this is just, we're borrowing this team, this is just, we're borrowing it, but this is theirs forever. And it's kind of funny, like
Right.
what you said, people make fun of me for being a Sacramento Kings fan, until this year, until we actually got, halfway decent, had a decent product on the table, and took the Warriors to Game 7, and it was kind of crazy around here in the Bay Area. I had people out of the woodworks contact me about the Kings, which is it cracks you up,
But
it's
Kevin,
but
can I ask you a question?
sure,
When the seasons weren't as good, when those that little drought you guys had there,
yeah,
um, what
little
made
no, huge drought. So let's get
you
real.
what made you stick around? What made you go, okay, this isn't going well. I'll just hop on fandom for another team. No big deal.
I'm very loyal when it comes to my brands. I'm not gonna jump ship. Well, I mean, especially with sports, like I'm a Las Vegas Raiders fan. I was an Oakland Raiders fan. I was an LA Raiders fan. I'm a Raiders fan. It didn't matter. My parents took me to Raider games when I was a kid. I remember sitting there, and being connected. And probably the same can go back to with the Kings. It's like, I was there at the height of when they were good. The Bibby, the Chris Webber, the
Yeah.
Vlade Divac, Paige Stoyak. I have a dog named Paige. That's
That's
how
awesome.
loyal that's how loyal I am. People look at you weird when you're yelling Paige. But anyway, but that's and it's one, it's a feeling.
Hmm.
Like I get there, and I'm weird when the announcer start. I love the beginning of a basketball game. To me, that's
Oh
one of
yeah.
the like the pomp and circumstance about starting a basketball game. To me, it is so intriguing, and I'm emotionally tied to that.
I mean,
I
that
get
makes
there for
total
that.
sense considering the
Yeah.
industry you're in. So yeah, I think
Well,
that.
yeah, and and I distinctly remember last season. Like I'm a season ticket holder. My son and I are at a game. We row C. We would look to the left. There was no one in our section, and maybe like the other section was half filled. We looked to our right. No one's in the same row C, and we're trying to figure out what section had someone next in row C. But we were there at the games because good or bad. I just feel connected to that team, and I will always be. So,
So the reason I asked is because I wanted that response. It's an emotional connection,
yeah, big
and
time.
that's that key. That's that secret ingredient for a brand. You got to
Yeah,
have that emotional connection with the people that you're positioning your brand towards.
yeah, and you could say there's no crying in baseball. I still cry. Sports are very emotional. I do cry. I will say
Yeah.
that. So,
Well, hey, I mean,
yeah,
look, there's worse things that you could build up around loyalty and crying and things like that. So
very true.
I think
Very
from
true.
a personal brand standpoint, if you can create that connection, the only way to do that is it's like making a friend, right? You want to make a couple of hundred friends that'll pay you some money across several decades. So you want to have that emotional connection with those people, and the only way to really do that is to define your personal brand based on who you are, and then sort of put those pieces out there piece by piece. And that's, I wish there was something more action itemable,
Yeah.
but it really becomes like I can't give you the answer to who you are. You need to define that. Once you define that, there are certainly steps you can take to make sure that that message comes across, but there can't be a message until you fully define.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like brand is like SEO. You're never going to figure it all out.
Well, it's
And it's
always changing.
that's where I was going to go with that too. And it's constantly SEO is constantly changing. So is your brand. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
well, let's say you
yeah.
started your business and you were single and things, you were looking at things in one way, in one perspective of the world, and then 5 years down the road, you're now a parent and you look at the world a little differently. And then you can use your stories as a parent to then connect to other parents, right?
Yeah.
There's how many people in our industry do you know where the party planners, they used to be the couple's best friend. They used to be somebody they could go and like get dinner with and even invite them to their bachelor or bachelorette parties or whatever they want to do. And then 20 years go by and now they're like the parental figure. And now they're
Yeah.
the authority. It still works. It's just a different role, a different brand, and a different position.
Yeah. Yeah. Times change. So, all right. So, anything you want to leave us with on branding before we move on? I have one or two questions for you. So,
Sure. I think consistency is the thing we really
okay.
touched on, and then just honing down on who you truly are. And if it might sound silly, but you're the sock, silly sock guy.
Yeah.
You're the first class seat
Southwest.
guy. Yeah. So it's just little things that people will connect to. A lot of people like the silly socks. Even if they're not silly sock wearers, they like that there's someone there that can give them that little moment of joy, right?
Yeah.
That's an emotional thing. So even if it's for me, I'm like I said, pre 2008 hip hop guy. I'll throw in Trapper Keeper references, something that can connect you to a form of nostalgia, something that can give you a little bit of a feeling, or even like, hey, I do like to wear nice suits, and if I'm the nice suit guy an event, great, but it has to have some sort of emotional connection.
Yeah. I mean, before we move on, do you think COVID changed anything when it came to branding for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID, the silver lining in some ways is that people started to realize, especially in the destination world, you don't have to, you could do a site visit, of course, but you don't have to meet every single time in one designated location. Your first meeting can be a Zoom meeting, your second meeting can be in person or on a call, whatever. Like you had mentioned, there's people that are okay with phone calls, there's people that'll hit you up in a DM on Instagram. It's just,
Hmm.
like you said, meet them where they're at. But I think it opened up, it kind of expanded the communication possibilities. I also think COVID, in some ways, I mean, as far as my experience, I can only speak about my experience. It decreased timelines where I used to get calls a year and a half out, and now they're like 3 to 6 months out. And I think that might be a case of just the mentality of the Amazon immediate quick order mentality of a generation that has experienced that and grew up with that. And I think it might be a case of, okay, I'll just call and it'll be available. And
Yeah.
if we make it happen, we're kind of feeding the monster, but we're making
No,
it happen.
I remember going through even recently we had a client, 10 days out before their wedding. We've met with them a bunch of different times and they called and like, "Hey, can you still provide all X, Y, and Z for my wedding?" And it's like, we look at our calendar, we're like, "Well, yeah, of course we can." We're still recovering as we go through COVID and getting back to things. And so, like you said, we feed into that, which is probably not good on our part. So,
Well, I mean, honestly, I feel like in some ways, all right, if I can get a leaf blower now, and if I order right now and get it delivered tomorrow morning,
yeah.
why can't you come to my wedding in 6 months?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they,
Oh,
they
no.
see things a
Yeah.
little differently.
Yeah. And I've never thought you'd be honest with you. I've never correlated the two until you just said something and it makes 100% sense. So,
It's hard to get into that mindset because of just the way that we grew up versus the way they grew up. It took me 2 hours to download Ice Ice Baby, but it no longer takes that.
no, that's it. Yeah. Well, even that, and they even can go on a Spotify, and
Right.
it's instant they could create a playlist of LL Cool J's greatest hits in a matter of like 30, maybe 90 seconds. You can do that,
Yeah.
and
And
have
that's
it
another
over.
reason I don't think nostalgia is going your way. I don't think it's necessarily a fad because of how accessible it is.
Yeah.
When we were kids, you're like, hey, remember that thing? And like, yeah, maybe I'll see it again someday. But now
Yeah.
it's like, hey, remember that Dunkaroos commercial from 1993? Let's look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Or you want to play all your old Mario games, you get the little
Mhm.
sim and you're playing all the old Mario games on Nintendo. So anyway,
Absolutely.
it all goes through that. So, all right. So we're getting ready to wrap up here, sir. We're as we record this right now, we're in the Western and Eastern Conference Finals of the NBA. And so tell me how you're feeling about basketball right now, sir.
I'm feeling really good. I think that as you are, I'm a lifelong basketball fan. If you were to ask me at 11, 10 years old, I would have told you I was an NBA player. I was a future NBA player. If Mary and Britney Spears didn't work out, I'd go to the NBA.
Oh,
Yeah.
good choice. Good choice.
Maybe it's best it didn't. Either one, I guess. But
Yeah.
I'm a lifelong basketball fan, and I'm seeing these playoffs bringing in fans, like casual fans that aren't necessarily always watching, which I think is good for the sport, and I think is good for the NBA brand to just bring in people. I think sometimes when you have the same teams winning over and over and over again, the casual fan isn't always on board because they're kind of it gets stagnant. People are, it's the same thing with a brand, right? Like if your brand
Yeah.
is represented by the same two teams over and over, it's great for those two teams, but for the overall bottom line, I'm sure the commissioners are looking at it going like, we need somebody else in here.
Yeah.
So, and on that note, I'm a huge LeBron James fan, and Father Time does seem to be undefeated. So that's it's
or
hard to watch, but
or
maybe
yep.
we're recording this now. Maybe something will happen in the next few games. I doubt it, but hats
I
off to
doubt
the
it.
teams that are making it happen. And I think it's great. I think that where we stand right now, I think it's good for people to sort of see. And I think if you have, like you mentioned, you go to basketball games with your son. If you have kids that are interested in basketball, have them watch. I'll say it. Have them watch the Miami Heat. Have them watch the ball
Oh
movement
yeah.
that's happening. It goes to show that half their team right now is like undrafted players.
Isn't that
So
amazing?
yeah, it just goes to show you that it's a team sport. That's why I don't ever like the like greatest of all time arguments, and I don't like the who's the better player because it's a team sport. So
Yeah.
there's so many factors that go into an individual's success,
Yeah.
and then of course into team success. And in some ways, you can correlate that to our industry. There's a lot of things that I can do as an MC, but if a photographer hasn't caught that, or you know what, there's something I could do as an MC to mess up something for a photographer.
Oh, big
It's,
time.
it's all teamwork too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you said about the Heat, about them being undrafted and stuff, because they were, as I was coming into work, I was listening to Sports Talk Radio,
Mhm.
and they were saying, take Popovich out of the equation. Is Eric Spoelstra the best NBA coach, going right now? And you probably you can't argue that at all. Like I don't think there's anyone better because he over his 15-year career, he's been in the playoffs all but 3 years. You know,
Yeah, but
and
I love that it weaves into our theme because we
yeah,
talked about adjustment too.
yeah,
He's adjusted and evolved,
yeah,
and especially coaches like that when they have, he started with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. He had a very different team that he has now, and he's evolved each time when he's gotten his new pack of players, if you will.
yeah,
So that goes to show that that's part of his personal brand, being able to adjust and make adjustments in game.
yeah.
So that's it's hard to argue that if you take Popovich out of the equation.
Yeah, no, it really is because and Popovich is. I mean, when he got
Yeah.
pretty lucky in the, gonna get that kid from France, and yeah, so
You always need a little luck. Listen, I
yeah,
know everybody says that about Phil Jackson, but you know what? Like, yeah, he was granted Jordan Pippen, but he brought in Rodman and had to navigate that and
oh yeah,
all the things we know now in retrospect. And then just if you can go do it with multiple teams or multiple reiterations of team, I don't care if it's the same franchise, but when you could do it with different groups of players, that's a testament to a good coach.
I agree, I agree. All right, so one of the things we like to do before we wrap up, what's your favorite part of a wedding?
Favorite part of a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
For me, and maybe this is selfish, but for me, it's introducing their first dance.
Mm.
I like to put a little customization, a little personalization on it. I do sort of like a 60 to 90-second introduction about their first dance because to me, I essentially call it the culmination of their courtship. It's essentially everything that they've experienced leading up to this very moment. And then also selfishly, a hug at the end of the night to know you did a great job. That's also
That's
good.
actually, there's nothing better than that. That's
Yeah.
really, yeah. It's
Yeah,
the
but
high
that
five.
culmination for first dance, because it's kind of like, all right, we've gone through all this. Imagine all the things their relationship has gone through, and we're all here in this. Talk about all the things that had to happen for all of us to be here, and there's one moment and place and time for this one song that
Yeah.
they're gonna dance to, and no one else moves during this.
Yeah. No,
So
that's the best. Yeah, that's amazing. So,
yeah.
all right. So how do people connect with you and find you, Artem?
Best way, artemlomaz.com, just my full name, Artemlomaz. As I mentioned, I'm not big on social media. I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to be a little bit better, trying to be a little bit more, I guess, active. So at Artem Lomaz, Instagram, and at 93 Entertainment, all spelled out, 93 Entertainment. And then, if you want to go old school, Facebook, whatever else. I don't know what other social media is coming down the pipeline in a couple of months or years, but I'm sure I'll have to get on that and adjust as we all do. But
Yeah.
best way, artemlomaz.com. You just shoot us a message, and I always make sure I get those. Inevitably, they
Perfect.
come to me at some point.
All right. That makes sense. All right. Well, sir, we can't. Oh, go ahead.
I just have one more thing for you because
Sure, sure.
I knew I'd need to prepare for you specifically with this.
Okay.
So, someone, and it might be a mutual friend of ours, but someone in the industry pointed out to me that I don't do fun, wacky socks.
Okay.
Now, so I'm not a fun, wacky sock kind of guy. Maybe beige is the most I'll go. That'll be the most thing you'll see from me that's fun and wacky. But he goes, okay, I will get you fun socks, and then you're gonna have to wear them. And I kind of brushed it off, like, okay, he was just joking. And then next time I saw him, he got me these Dennis Rodman socks.
Oh,
Like,
that's
he knows I'm a
amazing.
Rodman fan, and he got me these socks. And then so I had to one up the joke, and I said,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I'll get you socks that you have to wear at your next event. And I had my headshot put on socks, but
Ah.
I had to order in bulk.
Oh,
So then I gave him the pair as a gift, and then I'm left with these that are socks with my headshot on them. Then now
that's
I've given out to family members who think I'm insane. But those are the only two that I have. But those are my wacky socks for you. So I knew I
well.
had to prepare for you.
Well, and it's funny because I have socks with Alan Berg's face on it and Megan Ely's face on it. So you might have to send me your socks, and I might have to wear them at the next event that we're at together.
We could do like a sock exchange. So is it Alan and Megan, or those are two separate pairs?
Two separate pairs. So
That's amazing. At
yeah.
some point, we'll have to if you can get like the whip-aboard together for a photo and just get socks made
Oh,
for everybody.
that would be pretty funny. So.
Excellent.
So anyway, all right. Well, Artem, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here with me today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, as always, we could probably do a whole episode or podcast on just basketball because I found every time we talk, we enjoy it.
We could do it.
We found something else, but we also could probably talk about all the the late I call it late '90s, early 2000s hip hop and all the rap. We could probably do a whole other one on that as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm down for either one of those. Hey, what is it? The final start June 1st, something like that.
Yeah.
Let's do a final special. We
There
can
you
try
go.
that.
There you go. All right.
Excellent.
Well, Artem, thank you for being here today, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It was a pleasure. It was a blast. Thanks again for the hospitality.
Your pleasure. Thank you. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mind Your Wedding Business podcast brought to you by Wedding IQ. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please get in touch with me if you have a topic you would like for me to cover, or if you are in the area of your business you're struggling with, let us know. We'll be happy to help. I encourage you to check out our other episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're a fan, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. It helps others find our podcast so they can learn from our guests too. Thanks again for listening.